my name is Martin and welcome to this short video where I will show you how to install and perform the initial configuration of a VMware vCenter server. This video is the beginning of a small series of tutorials I will be doing, where I will start with a VMware vCenter server and we will by the end of the series have a full working VDI setup with a couple of servers with tester GPU cards as well. First of all, what is a vCenter server? Let us have a look at how VMware defines the vCenter server. They say, vCenter server provides a centralized platform for management, operation, resource provisioning, and performance evaluation of virtual machines and hosts. So in other words, VMware vCenter is the tool to use in order to manage and configure all your ESXi hosts. It's also the system where third-party applications connect to. This could be applications like Veeam backup software. Please have in mind that VMware vCenter requires licensed versions of ESXi in order to function. You cannot use the free version of ESXi together with vCenter. In my lab, I have a standard vCenter license, vSphere Enterprise Plus with a vSAN license for the ESXi host and an NSX Enterprise Plus as well, so I will be able to use and demonstrate all the neat features. But before we start going into the configuration, let me first show you what I usually use when doing custom installations. VMware have created a really good tool for documentation of all aspects of the installation and configuration of the vCenter server. Here you can type in all the configuration items before starting the installation process, so you do not forget or lose any parameters that might be needed later. Having your customer to fill out most of the information beforehand does come in handy, so you do not end up being stopped because you need information like DNS or IP information. The document can serve as the final documentation when performing the handover process for customer productions deployments as well. If you're using VMware Professional Service for installations, you will recognize this document as well. Other companies and consultants may have similar documents, but most often they are sourced from this. Since this is just a lab, I have not filled the document with any useful information. I just wanted to let you know that this exists and is very useful for production environments. By that said, let us get into the demo of the installation process. First, you need to download the vCenter ISO file from VMware. This does require you to have a VMware account. Since vCenter is a paid product, you can find the ISO file under your products in My VMware. I have already downloaded the file and mounted the ISO file to a Windows 11 workstation. We just start the installation process by running the Windows Installer UI. When the installer starts, it will give you 4 options: install, upgrade, migrate, and restore. If you already have an existing vCenter with an embedded platform controller, you can use the upgrade process. If it's an external or you have a Windows-based vCenter, you must use the migrate option. For upgrade or migrating, please refer to the VMware Product Interoperability matrix in order to ensure you're upgrading in the correct path. Since this is a new install, we hit the install button. The installation is a 2-stage process, and we start stage 1 and accept the license term. Please remember to read them all carefully. We need to install the VMware vCenter appliance somewhere. I have an existing ESI I'm using, and this is a bit of the egg and the hen. If you do not yet have an ESXi host, you need to skip this video and go straight to the installation of ESXi first and add a local data store to the host to install vCenter on. But as I said, I have an existing host, and I just enter the information for this host and accept the SSH certificate. Next, you enter the vCenter name and root password and hit next. Here you can select the size of your vCenter appliance. Your selection depends on the number of VMs you expect to have, going from small with 10 hosts and 100 VMs and up to extra large with 2,000 hosts and 35,000 VMs. For my environment, we'll go a size small. Next, we select the storage to install the appliance on. I select an existing QNAP network attached storage box using NFS. I know the performance is poor on that, but I will move the appliance to SSD-based storage later. Next, we enter all the management information for the appliance, the network the appliance VM is connected to, the IP information, etc. You can select both static IP and DHCP. I always use static. Most customers I have been with have virtual-based DHCP servers. That means if you have a breakdown and need to bring everything back online, you might run into some issues if your DHCP servers are unavailable. When all the needed information has been added, click Next and you will see a Ready to Complete page. Hitting Next will start the installation and complete stage 1 of our installation. When complete, click Continue to start stage 2 of the installation. I usually activate SSH. This could be considered a security issue. If your local policy requires it to be deactivated, leave it as is. You can always activate if needed in the management console. I do, however, recommend setting the NTP server for time synchronization. Here you can either create a new vCenter single sign-on domain. Or if you haven't existed, you can join this. Remember, this is not your local AD domain. I use the default vSphere.local and set the password. Hitting next will once again give you the ready to complete page. This will then start the stage 2 installation. This usually takes 5 to 10 minutes. When complete, you can then go to the vCenter getting starting page. Notice a self-signed certificate has been issued. I will in a later video show how to replace this certificate with one issued from Let's Encrypt, but I usually leave it as is, since the vCenter is not meant to be reachable from the internet. Entering the getting starting page will give you access to launch the vSphere client. This client is where all the magic happens, so go ahead and hit that button. You log on to the client using the admin user and the single sign-on domain we created earlier on. In this case, it is administrator at vSphere.local and the password we created in the installation process. Now we have an empty shell, so let's start by creating our data center. This is the top level. You can give it any name you like. However, if your organization have a naming standard, please refer to that. I just named it after the city I live in. Next, we need to create a cluster. The cluster is where we have our ESXi host. For the name of the cluster, I most of the time uses the ESXi model and type. In my lab, we'll be using Cisco UCS C240M4 servers. I also enable DRS, HA, and vSAN. Notice the new checkbox. This is the new vSAN 8, and this is where you select if this is a legacy vSAN or the new type where you no longer need the cache disks. I will go more into vSAN details in a later video. You can also choose to manage all hosts in the cluster with a single image. This is a setting that can be configured more detailed later. You might need to hit the refresh button in order to see the cluster we created. In this lab, installing the vCenter appliance on a slow storage systems sometimes gives some latency. Next, I will create the distributed switch. This is so we can add our ESXi host later and add the VM kernel ports for management, vMotion, and vSAN. I like to do this on forehand before adding the ESXi hosts. In this lab, I just call the DVS for VDS, as this will be the only DVS here. Often, if you have 4 or more NICs in your host, you can create more DVSs for specific use cases, like dedicate 2 NICs for vSAN. I selected VDS version 8, as this is a new fresh install. For backward compatibility, you can select older versions, but do remember if you're going to install VMware NSX, you need at least version 7 for your VDS. Next, we create the needed port groups with the respective VLAN IDs. That is the end of this tutorial, and we now have a minimal functional vCenter server appliance. But remember, there are a lot more settings that can be set, like using LDAP for users and groups. But this video just covered the basic. I will get into more details later, covering each setting when needed. I hope you enjoyed this and found it useful to get started with VMware vCenter.